Gentlemen. Welcome to preparing for the Black Swan event series, part 2. This session is hosted by the BDO Advisory Services, in particular the BDO Cyber Lab. My name is Shannon DuPont, and I'm the Associate Director within BDO Cyber Lab. We're responsible for providing assurance and advisory services across the cyber landscape, things such as cyber risk assessments, cyber incident readiness reviews, cyber policies and procedures, ransomware readiness, penetration testing and vulnerability assessments, and so on and so forth, to assist organizations with improving their risk posture and general audit requirements. So cybersecurity refers to technologies and processes designed to protect information assets, by addressing threats to information processed, stored, and transferred through the network. This month is an essential month for cybersecurity and focuses on cyber awareness. Our 4-part Black Swan series aims to raise awareness and share knowledge with businesses about cybersecurity risks, legal requirements and compliance, and implementation of technology control measures to protect your information assets against these cyber threats. Last week, we started with sharing insights on the Cyber Crimes Act and Protection of Personal Information Act, which we are today following up by cyber awareness enablement through a Meeting the Hacker webinar. Next week, we'll then provide insights into technology to protect network perimeters to the cloud, and in part 4, discuss the automation of vulnerability management in the organization. Before I proceed, I'd like to go through a few logistics. The webinar is for approximately 45 minutes. With your consent, of course, this webinar will be recorded and made available through our website. If you're uncomfortable with recording, please do let us know. And lastly, you're welcome to share your questions. You can drop these in the Q&A, and we'll attend to them at the end of the presentation. So the aim of this particular webinar is to provide you with cybersecurity insights from the perspective of an actual ethical hacker, hence the Meet the Hacker title. There's a number of topics that will be covered, including things such as social engineering, phishing, vishing, physical access passwords, and attacking tools. Our hacker who will be presenting is Rudy Dix. Rudy's a director of cybersecurity at Checkmark. He has over 20 years experience in the field and carries a number of qualifications such as CISSP, Certified Ethical Hacking, Offensive Security, Certified OSCP Professional, and OSCP Penetration Testing. Rudy has a record of leading penetration tests, implementing frameworks in ISMS, and conducting cyber risk and impact assessments. I've had the pleasure of working with him on a few projects, and I can say that you can have all the confidence to know that you're in the hands of a very skilled cyber professional. So I don't want to take up too much time, as he does have some interesting insights, which I'm sure you'll find very valuable. So Rudy, over to you.
Thank you very much, Shannon. That's a very kind introduction. Let me make sure everything is correct. I trust everyone can see me and hear me. I like to keep things fairly informal. As Shannon said, please feel free to write some questions, some thoughts. If I'm talking about something that you've maybe experienced and you'd like to share your experience with us on text, that would be appreciated. I think it's often the most successful companies that are able to learn from other people's mistakes when it comes to cybersecurity, rather than waiting for an attack or learning from their own mistakes. So we really do invite your participation here. So from my side, firstly, thank you very much for attending. I know your time is valuable and you're choosing to spend it with us. With that in mind, I hope that you're going to find the session interesting, in whether you're a manager or a cybersecurity professional, or just somebody who has an interest in the field. You'll find at least something in the session that is of value to you. So Shannon gave me that very kind introduction. I'm not going to focus on my resume or credentials too much, but I do want to tell you a little bit about my background and how I got started in this field. I have always been a bit of a computer nerd. I've always loved all things computers. Very fortunate to have been able to be exposed to computers from a young age. And the internet really, for me, kicked off towards the end of my high school career. That was the days of 56K dial-up modems. Had to fight the family to get access to our only phone line. And while I was on the line, nobody could use the telephone in the house. And also, as soon as somebody picked up the phone to make a call, I would get disconnected immediately. And it would lead to quite a few interesting family dynamics. But fortunately, my family was very tolerant about my hobby and my interest. And for the very old people, maybe in the room, showing my age, the Telkom came up with this idea of R7 call more, where you would be able to stay connected to the internet, and the cost would never go over R7, which means the phone line became mine entirely from Friday night to Monday morning, 6 o'clock. I spent a lot of this time on chat clients. Specifically, it's called IRC, or Internet Relay Chat. And I met a lot of interesting people from all over the world on these chat clients. And a lot of them had the same hobbies and interests I did around. It wasn't really cybersecurity at that point, it was just computers in general. But even from a young age, I had a real affinity towards social engineering. I pretty quickly realized that most people on the internet didn't really understand what they were doing and what the consequences were of what they were doing. So it was pretty easy to manipulate somebody on the internet to install something or run a file or double click on something they didn't know about, especially in the early days where they didn't even know about antivirus. Um, and a lot of, again, a lot of this was internal to our little community, but we would spend a lot of our time trying to gain control of each other's IRC channels and each other's computers and things like that. And that's really where I learned a lot of what is today considered cybersecurity. In my early days, I did a lot of free penetration testing. I'm sure most of you know that these days it's a fairly expensive exercise, but back then, just trying to convince a business to let you break into the infrastructure was a hard enough task without trying to convince them to pay money for it as well. So I really did do this for as long as it's been a thing, maybe maybe even longer, and try to convince people to do it. I mean, obviously outside the very large corporates, which has been, especially in South Africa, we have a couple of financial institutions, corporates, who have been at the forefront of cybersecurity for as long as it's been a thing. So that's where I got my start. Maybe for the people who aren't as familiar with penetration testing as a concept, I like to explain it the following way. When maybe you've built a new house, right, for yourself, it's been your dream project your whole life, and unfortunately, the reality of the country we live in means that we have to give a fair amount of consideration to physical security when we're talking about building a house. One of the best ways, I think, to get that house as safe as it can possibly be is to go and hire, if you can find one, maybe an ex-criminal, somebody who used to burglarize houses for a living. If you can get that guy to come look at your house and tell you how they would go about breaking into your house, you can do a lot of things to then make your house more secure. And that's really what penetration testing is around IT and security in our industry as well. You use the same tools and techniques that a real bad guy would use. We simulate those attacks. And then we write this very comprehensive report for our clients and explain to them, here's how we got into the infrastructure, here's what we did, and what you can do to prevent a legitimate bad guy from doing the same thing and maybe leveraging on those attacks. So in a nutshell, that is penetration testing. As I mentioned at the start, I really understood from a very young age the power of social engineering. It's always been my personal preference. Um, it just makes sense to me. There are a lot of people that do not know very much about computers that are using them, and if we can find a good excuse, a good reason for them to do something, whether that is open a file, download a file, go to a website, uh, there are lots of different scenarios, but if we can get them to do something they're not supposed to, we can often bypass a lot of security, and that's what this little slide on the left hand side is about. Um, on the one side, on the left hand side, you've got the IT department with all of their fancy equipment, right? They've got firewalls and antivirus and intrusion detection systems and all of these good things that they use to keep you guys safe. And on the other side, we've got Dave. Now, the unfortunate reality is Dave wins this boxing match every time. It does not matter how good your IT team is. They can do everything right. They can buy the newest, most expensive tools and technologies. Um, if I can manipulate Dave into giving me access to his machine, he has a job to do. He needs to be able to access certain things. Otherwise, he wouldn't be of value to your business. So if I can manipulate him into doing something he's not supposed to and gain access to his machine, that very likely means I'm going to be able to access all kinds of resources inside your business, even when everything is done correctly. And that's really what social engineering is about. And the reality is, it hasn't really changed from my 20 years ago IRC days to today. We're still using phishing. We're still using voice phone calls and other social engineering techniques as one of the most effective ways to gain access to businesses. It's almost like a cheat code for us. When we do an assessment for a client, we'll do all of the good things like testing their firewalls and what ports are exposed to the internet and all of the things that they have to. But if we don't make any headway and we still need to gain access to the business, we'll usually fall back to social engineering and try to manipulate staff. And the unfortunate reality is we're successful a lot more than not. So that's really what we're going to be talking about today. And obviously, one of the most prominent types of social engineering is phishing. You're all familiar with this. I don't need to spend a ton of time on this, but unfortunately, as I've been pointing out, it worked 20 years ago. It still works today. We still have success on many. I'm saying every month we still have engagements where social engineering leads to access of the infrastructure. A lot of you, I'm sure, will be familiar with an attack that happens where one of your suppliers, vendors, clients gets compromised. They send an email to people inside your organization. It'll be anything from an invoice to a range of different excuses. But as soon as they send you this invoice and you click on it, you get sent to a portal like this one on the right-hand side that says to access this file, you need to authenticate first. Then you type in your username and password. Obviously, this was an attack, and your entire mailbox then gets, or your address book then gets sent the same attack. So it's just permanently perpetuating. These attackers are having enormous amounts of success. And the worst part is they're not even trying very hard. This is an automated process that's exceptionally successful, and many large companies have struggled with keeping these automated systems out. I'm sure you can imagine how much worse this gets when it becomes a more sophisticated targeted attack, where we'll do some research about your organization specifically, make the emails more related to your field or your clients or vendors or suppliers. It's not that hard to manipulate someone who's not paying attention. And I want to maybe touch on that for a second, because I often, when speaking to especially IT people, there's a sense of the people who fall for this stuff are stupid. They don't know what they're doing. They're incompetent. And I'm sure that's the case sometimes, but it's certainly not, in my experience, to the majority. We've caught some very smart, successful, high-level executives in these attacks. And again, it's not that these people are too stupid to determine that this is an attack. It's just we're all busy. It's pretty easy to sit in a session like this and pick out that the domain is wrong, or there's a spelling mistake, or the signature is not quite correct. But that's not how these attacks take place in the real world. In the real world, you're having a bad day, right? Let's hypothetically say you had a fight with your spouse, or your kid was sick and up all night crying and you didn't get enough sleep, or your car wouldn't start this morning. You get to the office late, you're under pressure, everybody's shouting at you. You have to get into a meeting in 15 minutes that you're not completely prepped for, and you're just trying to catch up on a couple of emails before you dive into that meeting. The point I'm trying to make is this can happen to all of us. It's not that people are malicious or dumb, or they don't care about your company. Anybody can have a bad day. And if the attack comes into your mailbox on that day, it's not impossible that you, no matter how good you are at IT, click on that email and accidentally type your credentials into the wrong place, which is why I am very passionate about multi-factor authentication. So there are three different types of authentication that we deal with. The first one is something you know, and you'll all be familiar with this. This is where you memorize your password, and when it's needed, you type it in, and that's pretty easy. The second one is something you have, and again, you'll be familiar with this. This is where when you want to add a beneficiary on the bank, for example, not only do you have to type in your password, but you also have to type in a code that gets generated by your phone, or you have to apply with 1 or 9 or whatever it is for your bank. So that's something you have. And then the third type is something you are. That's your biometrics, right? Your fingerprint, your retinal scan, your iris scan. Again, a lot of the banks are now implementing voice-activated biometrics, which means as you're speaking to the consultant, the agent on the phone, these computers are doing a voice analysis, and they can determine very accurately that you really are who you say you are, which means we're going to get to do away with all of these security questions that are blocking us in due course. The thing I want to get at here is wherever possible, you really want to try and make use of at least two of these three things, right? You either want to use your password and your phone, or your password and your fingerprint, or your phone and your fingerprint. Um, and as I mentioned, the bank is already making you do that. When you want to add a beneficiary, you have to not only type in your password, but also do something on your phone. They're forcing you to make use of multi-factor. You'd be surprised how many tools you guys are already using that allow you to make use of MFA if you just opt into it. Office 365, Google, any cloud storage provider, right? Whether that's Dropbox or um, Azure or Google Docs or anything like that. They all have MFA options. And I would really want to encourage you all to start making use of that. So when a guy like me comes along and he does manipulate you into typing in your username and password into the wrong website, as soon as I try to log in, I'm prompted with what is the MFA code. And you get a prompt on your phone saying you just tried to log in from somewhere. What is the code? So it really makes my job a lot harder if you use that. So definitely something I would encourage. Um, one of the more popular attacks that we do, just again to give you a couple of insights, we'll send an email as your IT manager. In a world of LinkedIn and social media, not that hard to go identify who the IT manager or head of the department is. And we'll just send an email as that person to the entire company or to a couple of select people saying, the IT department has flagged your account for irregular use of internet activities. Kindly review and acknowledge our updated acceptable use policy. It's important to understand that we're logging what you're doing on the internet, especially on VPN. So again, not necessarily you, but people get this email. They're like, "Oh, what did I do? Where did I accidentally go? Was it a cookie? Did I leave the VPN on when I was doing other work or things for my private business?" So they just we generate that fear, making it very likely that you click on the policy, especially if the email address is correct and the signatures are correct and everything looks correct. Um, and then it's as simple as saying, listen, if you do want to review this document, then you just have to provide your username and password. We'll set up a generic, your logo here, intranet, website, or we'll do the Office 365 that I showed you on a previous slide, or Google. The options are unlimited. And unfortunately, it's very, very easy to make these websites. You get tools that you can go download off the internet, and you don't need to know anything about web development. You can simply point this tool at any website, and it will make you a copy and host it on the internet for you. You don't have to understand hosting or web development or any of that stuff. It does all of the heavy lifting for you. And what that means is a kid in his mom's basement is likely to be able to pull off some of these attacks. Um, and again, when it becomes a volume game, it becomes much more likely that you're going to fall for the scam. So again, for our clients, we try and take a little bit more of a mature approach. We'll actually build a website with all the correct branding and logos and things for that client to make it look legitimate. The next thing I want to talk about is phishing, which is voice phishing. I'm going to play a little clip that's pretty self-explanatory.
So I invited a few of the world's best hackers to try to hack me and show me where my vulnerabilities are. And now I'm going to meet them in Las Vegas for DEF CON, the biggest hacker convention of the year. They're going to hack me using social engineering, which is essentially hacking without any code. They just use a phone and an internet connection.
Do you want to do a sample phishing call?
What's phishing?
Phishing is voice elicitation, and basically what you do is you use the phone to extract information or data points that can be used in a later attack.
Let's do it.
Okay.
Who are you going to call?
Maybe I'll call your cell phone provider and see if I can get them to give me your email address.
I bet they're good. I bet they have my back. But yeah, go for it.
I'm going to spoof from your number, so it's going to look like it's calling from you.
Okay.
Hi, I'm so sorry. Can you hear me okay? My baby, I'm sorry. my husband's like, we're about to apply for a loan and we just had a baby and he's like, get this done by today. So I'm so sorry. I can't call you back. I'm trying to log into our account for uses information and I can't remember what email address we used to log the account. The baby's crying and can you help me? Awesome.
In just 30 seconds,
At gmail.com.
Jessica gets access to my personal email address.
Now, if I needed to add our older daughter on our account so she could call in and make changes, how would I need to go about doing that? You would have to send me a secure PIN through a text message? Yeah. Well, the thing is, I don't think I'll be able to receive a text message if I'm on the phone. Oh, I'm not on there either? I, so I thought when we got married, he added me to the account.
Jess uses my girlfriend's name and a fake social security number
5127.
to set up her own personal access to my account.
Wait, I'm sorry. So there's no password on my account right now? Can I set that up?
She even gets the support person to change my password.
Thank you so much for your help today.
So she just basically blocked me out of my own account.
I'll get her fed after this. All right. Thank you.
Holy shit. So they just gave you access to my entire cell phone account.
You're going to have to go on and change your password now because it's Jess, my name.
And all it took was a crying baby and a phone call.
Yeah.
Okay, I really like this clip because it very quickly encapsulates something that a lot of people don't think about. They spend a lot of time and energy trying to secure their business, but then it's as simple as picking up the phone and saying, listen, I'm from the IT department. I'm going to come by on Thursday, just giving you a heads up. And then when I get there, they're much more likely to let me do whatever I want. I sit on their machine, test something, because what kind of attacker phones ahead and says I'm going to be there? So it's very effective. And you know from this clip that that person in the call center did something wrong, right? There's got to be some sort of policy that says you send them the code or you verify their identity, you ask them security question, whatever it is. But as you can see, attackers are very, very good at manipulating feelings. It makes it look like this poor lady is about to have a meltdown. Her husband is shouting at her, the baby's crying. We all feel empathy. We want to help. And that is something that attackers are very good at manipulating, as you can see from the clip. Another example of this that's pretty effective or pretty common is just targeting the receptionist at a large business. The thing is, we generally speaking hire receptionists because they are friendly and outgoing people. It's part of what we look for in that role. So when I walk up to a receptionist with a USB memory stick and I say, listen, I'm here for an interview, but I spilled coffee on my CV on the way in. Please, can you just print out a copy for me? I really need this job. I don't want to look like an idiot. They're usually going to help me unless you've already taught them better, because they want to be helpful. It's just human nature, and we're pretty good at doing that. So if she does allow me to, she'll pop that memory stick into the machine, double click on my CV, print it out for me. And when she does, I get full access to a computer. I can go back to my car and access her machine. And from there, very, very easy to gain access to the rest of the business, because who's not going to respond to an email from reception asking them to open a file, click on a link, whatever it is? It makes it very easy to move laterally through the organization. And it's just because, again, people are friendly. And in a similar vein, smishing works the same way. Sometimes it's called pretexting. We just send a message beforehand saying, listen, this thing's going to happen. We're going to need you to do this in the future, just letting you know. Makes it much more likely that people are going to play ball than when you just get there unexpectedly and ask them to do things. Another type of attack that's pretty common for us that we have a lot of success with, and again, it has to do with manipulating people. Humans are curious by nature. It's just a fact. So what we do is we leave memory sticks lying around in the kitchen, in the bathroom, in the canteen. And almost without fail, somebody will pick that thing up, walk it over to their business machine and plug it in. And when they do, they'll see one of the icons that you see there. It'll be a game or a movie or music. By far my best performer is payroll.zip. So people think, oh, finance left this thing out. Let's see what the other guys are earning. I've had clients click on this thing 7, 8 times in a row trying to get it to open. When you do click on it, nothing happens. There's no pop-up. There's nothing weird on your screen. It doesn't flicker black. It's not like in the movies. When you double-click on the file, quite literally nothing happens from your perspective. But in the back end, you are instructing your computer to make a connection out to me on the same port that you use to browse the internet. This changes for different clients, but generalizing a little bit, you are telling your computer to connect to my, what we call command and control center, sitting out on the internet. So I don't have to do anything. I just sit there waiting, and you are the one that's giving me access to your machine. And what's interesting about these attacks is there's a bit of a cat and mouse game, and again, I'm oversimplifying, but for the most part, antivirus looks for things it knows about, right? So that's why you keep having to update your virus definitions. There's a bunch of analysts sitting in a complex somewhere, and they say, here's what the viruses look like. When you see the code that looks like this or has the signature, make sure you block it. When an attacker, or when we are doing a more mature attack, we write our own. Think about it as a virus. It's not really, but for simplicity, we write our own virus that these antivirus tools have never seen before. And if they haven't seen it, they don't really know that they're supposed to block it, which then lets us bypass your antivirus completely. And the same thing is kind of true for your firewall. Um, a firewall, generally speaking, is trying to stop bad things from coming into your business. It doesn't stop you from going out onto the internet and doing your job. That's kind of what's expected from you. So if you double click on this file, you're telling your computer to make a connection out on the same port that you used to surf the internet to connect to. So the firewall doesn't see anything unusual, especially when that traffic is encrypted as well. So again, I am oversimplifying. The antivirus guys and the firewall guys and your team, IT team, are all working very, very hard to stop these kinds of attacks. And it's a bit of a cat and mouse game where the antivirus guys come up with a new system that stops our attacks, and then we come up with a new way to bypass those attacks. And it's a never-ending cat and mouse game. But at least for now, it's certainly becoming much harder over time. But at least for now, we're still able to successfully demonstrate our ability to bypass both the AV and the firewall. And something that's a little bit newer, maybe that you'll find interesting, that's in the same vein, but not as commonly talked about. You get these cables that basically look like phone charge cables. And in the we'll just leave them lying around, right? Just you'll walk in one day, your phone's flat, you forgot your charger at home, you see a charging cable lying around on a table or on a desk. You pick it up, you plug it in. And you'll know this, where as soon as you plug your phone into your computer to charge it, you get this prompt that says, listen, do you trust this device? You say yes. The thing is, this little charging cable that I'm showing you here has got a chip inside the USB cable. And when you say you trust the device, you're not talking about your computer, you're talking about the chip in the charging cable. And long story short, we get full access to your computer because of this charging cable that you're using, or your phone in some cases. So you really don't want to be using, just like you don't want to be picking up strangers' USBs and plugging them in, you don't want to be using somebody else's charging cable. On the positive side, these cables are still fairly expensive to manufacture, so they're not generally as common as USB sticks are, but it all depends on the sophistication of your attacker. Okay, very briefly talk about ransomware. Again, I used to explain to people what this is and how it works, but these days everyone knows. Many people have suffered ransomware attacks, so we won't spend too much time on it. I'll just reiterate that it's not only stupid people that fall for these things. If I get you on the right day, doesn't matter how much you know about IT, it's possible for you to not pay attention. And this is definitely the biggest risk that your average user poses to their organization, right? We've seen cases where multinationals on 3 continents have been fully ransomed in a couple of hours because one person clicked on a ransomware attack they weren't supposed to. And we've also seen some pretty mature attacks where the ransomware will sit dormant on the infrastructure for a few days or weeks before it actually encrypts your data, so that when the IT team don't want to pay and they do backups, they restore the backups to get you guys up and running. It takes them 3 or 4 days to get everybody up and running again. They restore this ransomware payload along with the backup, and 2 days later you walk in, everything's encrypted again because they just restored the malicious software along with the backups, because it's been sitting in the organization for so long. And slightly differently, but similarly, we've seen attacks that they start by exploiting a vulnerability inside the backup software. And it encrypts the backups first before it encrypts the rest of the business. So you can't restore your backups and you're forced to pay. It's also a very good point to have a discussion around, do you have disconnected, off-site backups so that you can't have the backups being encrypted as well. It's certainly something that some organizations forget to think about or talk about. Another type of attack I want to talk about here is called physical access. This picture on the left-hand side is one of my favorites. This guy is having an interview on the BBC, and right behind him, for literally the whole world to see, is his username and username and password on the whiteboard. And we see this all the time in our legitimate engagements. I'm going on leave for a few days. Here's my password, and they write it on the whiteboard, or maternity leave, or whatever it is. But people write down their passwords for themselves and for other people, right? You sticky note under the keyboard, or you put it in your little notebook that you put in your top drawer. When attackers know that people do these things, it's much more likely that they're going to be able to find this and use it. Something else we do, not so much anymore, but it used to be pretty popular, is called dumpster diving. This is where we go look at the trash that you guys throw away. It doesn't necessarily have to be like a password or a bank statement or something super sensitive. Even just like a reference number. If you throw away a piece of paper with a reference number, we can phone the call center, quote the reference number, and then using the same techniques we saw in that video earlier, get them to give us your ID number or address or something sensitive. So you really want to be careful about what you throw away, especially in a world of POPIA, right? You really don't want to be throwing away personally identifiable information without disposing of it properly. Tailgating, also very common. If I'm not allowed into a building, I'll just find somebody and I'll walk slightly behind them, very close to them, and it looks like they're escorting me into the building. They have no idea I'm there, and security and reception, everybody else just lets me walk past. And if I do get into your building, there's a lot of really interesting things I can do. That little computer in the bottom right-hand side is called a Raspberry Pi. You can keep that running on battery power for up to a few days. So we'll find a corner, put everything in a neat little black case, and then just plug that into a network port that we find open and give it 3G, 5G access. And now we have internet access to your internal network just because you let us into the building. So one of the more interesting stories that we've seen here is we did an engagement a while ago with an airline. And as I'm sure you can imagine, they are very sensitive about security. They take the safety of their passengers very, very seriously. So they're very sophisticated and mature, and they've iterated on security a lot, which is why we were surprised that one of our pen testers was able to walk into an open plan office and ask the lady to use a computer, and she got up and let him sit there, and he actually used the office printer, the shared printer, to print out the proof that he was sitting on her machine and had gotten access to her computer. After the engagement was done, we did a debrief with them, and we asked the lady, you've gone through all of this training and awareness, you know better, why did you let this guy sit at your machine and work here? And she said, look, he was dressed in a Navy suit, and I thought he was one of the pilots. I thought he was here on a layover, and he just wanted to check his email quickly in between flights. And I mean, I just wanted to help the guy out and give him a... So completely unbeknownst to us, it certainly wasn't planned, but just because the guy was wearing a blue suit, she made an inference that he was a pilot and gave him access to the machine, and it was as simple as that. So a lot of the time, it's just about getting lucky, even when the client knows better. And then obviously the last thing I want to talk about here is a clean desk policy, right? I know a lot of people think it's crazy that the clean desk policy says you only have the papers on your desk that you're actively busy working with. You don't have other things lying around. Now, I know a lot of people whose desk actually looks like the one in the picture, but it's very, very important that you don't have sensitive information, personally identifiable information, sitting in your open plan office. If a guy like me can just walk in and take photos on my phone of all the things you have sitting out there in the open. Last thing I want to talk about here briefly is password cracking. In my experience, people are very, very bad at cracking passwords or picking passwords, right? We've been cracking passwords for a very long time. We've gotten very good at it. But I've put together a little thought experiment that I'd like to use to just demonstrate what I think about picking passwords. So if I used a crappy old laptop from 2012 to try and crack the following passwords, how long would it take? If your password was password 1, it would take about 4 seconds. Kind of makes sense, right? That's a really bad password. It's one of the first things we're going to guess. If your password spells out the middle one, and I think you can all read this, it spells out hard to remember. It's because we've all gotten very good at what we call substitution. We say, Instead of an E, I'm going to put a 3. Instead of an A, I'm going to put a 4. I'm going to put a 1 instead of an I or an L. We substitute things, an @ sign instead of an A. And I think most of you would agree that's a pretty good password. That's probably longer than your password is right now. So not bad. We'd take that laptop 4 months. So that's a pretty long time. That's a good password. But look at the last one. James eats a giant peach. All in lowercase, nothing fancy. Spaces count as special characters, but I'm saying this is not a very sophisticated password. It would take 10,000 centuries to crack that password. And the reason for that is how long it is. It is a much longer password than the middle one. The thing that's happening right now is people are trying to outthink computers like computers. And it's mostly our fault, security professionals, because we've been teaching you must have uppercase and lowercase and numbers and special characters. But we always say it must be 8 characters wrong. It was your password requirement 10 years ago was 8 characters, and today it's 8 characters. And computers have just gotten more and more powerful, and we haven't changed that number. So we've gotten very, very good at cracking passwords, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But the point is, longer passwords are much, much harder to crack, and they become exponentially longer. Again, I'm going to show you later. The problem is right now we're trying to outthink computers like computers, right? You're sitting there going, was it an E? Was it a 3? Where did I put that comma? Can't remember my password. I have to get the IT guys to reset it for me. Meanwhile, I'm guessing your password at billions of guesses a second, and I'm saying for every E, try a 3. Makes it very, very easy for me to just try all of those combinations. People, on the other hand, are very good at writing sentences. It's what we do, right? We all, for a living, and one way or another, communicate. We write emails, we talk. That's how we make our living. So if you just start picking sentences as passwords, you're going to find that you're going to pick these incredibly long passwords that are impossible for me to crack. And it's going to be much easier for you to remember, and you're going to have an easier time typing it, because you're not doing this weird keyboard yoga stuff where you have to get to these weird combinations to type in your password. You're going to type like you do every day, which we're good at. So stop trying to pick these weird passwords and pick sentences for your passwords. And you're going to find that you're going to have very long, easy to remember passwords. So I just want to give you a little bit of background on what how a password works, because it's pertinent to the next part. So I'm sure you've wondered, why can't IT guys tell me what my password is, right? Like they've said many times, I don't know what your password is. I can change it for you, but I can't tell you what it is. And the reason for that is your password doesn't get saved when you type it in. What happens instead is it goes through a very complicated mathematical process, and it spits out a string like that one in green. It's called a hash. And that hash gets saved on the server. And the important thing here is this is a one-way process. You can take the password, and we all know the formula to make it into its hash, but there's no way to take the hash and make it back into the password. That's by design. So that hash gets saved on the server. Tomorrow morning when you type in your password, it says, does the password you just typed in after going through this mathematical process match the one I have on file? If so, I give you access to the thing. If not, I don't. And why this is good is if a guy like me gets onto that server, he doesn't automatically get access to all of your passwords sitting there in plain text, hopefully. We've seen some people store those plain text passwords. Anytime somebody mails you your password, there's no way that they can do that if they're not saving your password. So that's a cause for concern. They should only be able to let you change it. So we go and we pre-compile many of the most commonly used passwords, right? And we know things about you guys. I know almost all of you sitting in this call right now, unless you're an IT professional, you have an 8-character password. It starts with an uppercase. It's probably got 2 or 3 numbers at the back. It's very, very common. So when I'm cracking passwords, I'm guessing in that format. I'm guessing start with only uppercase, then a bunch of lowercase, 5 or 6, and then 2 or 3 numbers at the end. And that covers 80% of everyone's passwords. And we also know you like doing things like spring, September, January, November, whatever. We get these systems. We have these tools that will generate the relevant to the current time passwords and put them into a list for us. So the reason I'm telling you about all of this is we go and pre-compile all of these commonly used passwords into their hashes, because we know what that process looks like. And then what we'll do is go say, if I ever get my hands on your on your hash, does the hash I just stole from you match any of the hundreds or thousands or millions of commonly used passwords? And if it does, I know what your password is. This is what's called a dictionary attack. It's not just the words in the dictionary. Even our small lists contain multiple millions of commonly used words and phrases. And this is why you should not pick a password that's commonly used. Hope that's clear. Hope that makes sense. Happy to answer questions about that at the end. So we use we use graphics cards to do these cracking processes. And they're very powerful, right? This is stuff you can buy over the counter, but they're not inexpensive. But we have a bunch of these graphics cards sitting together, and they are very, very good at cracking passwords. We guess your passwords in this screenshot. We do 115 billion guesses a second, which means for the screenshot at the bottom, your 9-character password is taking no more than 3 hours to crack. Your 8-character password takes a little bit less than 5 minutes. You can see this table on the right-hand side with its source. They're saying you need to be in the green. And it's also important to understand, people don't get this. They say, how good is a long enough password? I'm not saying don't use uppercase, don't use special characters. Those things are useful. They're helpful. I'm just saying don't use them to the detriment of picking something that you're going to remember, don't have to write down, and are going to be able to type out. The more of these things you use, the less lengthy your password needs to be. But I'm saying a 8-character password takes 5 minutes. 9-character password takes 3 hours. 10-character password takes about 2 days. By the time we get to 12 characters, it takes more than a month. So I'm saying if you are changing your password every month, 12 characters is enough. I'm not going to have time to crack all of the possible combinations before that month is over. I could get lucky and get it as one of the first couple of days of guesses, right? It's possible, but generally speaking, all I'm trying to say here is an 8-character password is just not good enough with the computing power we have today. And all of this is assuming I get access to your hash, which there are lots of ways we can do, but it's not a given. I'm cognizant of the time, and I do see a couple of questions, so I just want to wrap up briefly. Please feel free to type your questions, and we'll go through them at the end. I do want to touch on Wi-Fi because I think it's misunderstood, especially public Wi-Fi. The thing about public Wi-Fi is that key that you'll often see it, right? The shared Wi-Fi password is this. You'll get it on a little a slip of paper when you check into the hotel, or it'll be on a card at the restaurant. That shared password by design is the thing that's supposed to keep you safe. And again, I'm oversimplifying. We do have some newer shared Wi-Fi systems that are very good at isolating people from one another. But your local coffee shop probably just has this one shared password and everybody's using the same thing. And if that's true, what you're effectively doing is you're getting up and shouting everything you're doing to everyone else inside that coffee shop. Very easy for me to see what other people are doing on that shared network. And attackers do that. So very important that you don't do sensitive stuff on public Wi-Fi, right? I'm thinking about airports, hotel rooms especially. People forget that the hotel room has a shared Wi-Fi. If you do travel a lot, please invest in a good VPN. Many of the corporates will have their VPN assigned to you. You'll already be forced to log into the VPN before you can do anything in the business. And if you don't, go buy a good, trusted, reputable VPN. Please don't use a free VPN. You've all heard this. If you're not paying for the service, you are the service. They're taking your information. There's no other way that system makes sense. They're not going to buy those servers and pay for all of that bandwidth and give it to you for free if there's nothing in it for them. So please stay away from free VPNs. As soon as you connect to that shared Wi-Fi, connect your VPN first. That makes an encrypted tunnel. That means other people like me can't see what you're doing. Another attack that's fairly common, this little box on the right-hand side is called a Wi-Fi pineapple. And what we can do is put that Wi-Fi pineapple in, let's use the coffee shop, right? So I'm sitting in the coffee shop. My Wi-Fi pineapple will kick the coffee shop's Wi-Fi off the network and put my device in its place. It's got the same SSID. It's got the same name. Everything looks correct. Your phone, your tablet, your device, without even prompting you, will jump from the other device to my device. And now I can see everything you're doing. And these things are, again, oversimplifying, but it's so sophisticated. We can even strip the encryption off the packets before we send them out, so that we can read those responses in plain text, so that the data is not encrypted, and we can see what's going on. Okay, so just to summarize, what can you do? If you see something, say something, right? If you see a guy walking around your office unescorted, even if he's well dressed, if I'm trying to blend in your business, I'm gonna wear a suit and I'm gonna talk on my phone. I'm gonna look like I'm busy and I know where I'm going and I want people to leave me alone. And generally speaking, they do. It's very rare that somebody stops me and says, "Listen, who are you? What are you doing here? Can I help you with something?" And I want to encourage you, and by extension, for you to encourage your staff to do the same thing. They got to be in a position where they can say, "Listen, can I help you with something? Why are you walking around our business unescorted?" And if you're not comfortable getting into that conflict situation, at least know who to phone, right? You don't just pretend you didn't see anything and you go about your day. We do this a lot. I had a client that I worked with for it was a long-term engagement, and we managed to manipulate a user into clicking on something they weren't supposed to. We even had a little black box pop up for a second and disappear. The user either didn't see it or they pretended not to see it, because when the IT guys are grumpy and people are kind of, you don't want to get in trouble. You don't want to say anything and have the IT guys shout at you. So we sat inside that organization with their permission, obviously, for it was almost 3 months before we told them that we were there and we had gotten access to everything. And it was just because their team did not, the lady didn't say anything. I still to this day don't know if she didn't notice or was too scared to say something. But you really want to encourage your people to speak up so that they. Also, people are scared of looking stupid. Like, I don't want to say anything because people are going to think I'm dumb. I asked the wrong question. That's absolutely the wrong way to go about security culture inside your organization. The second thing here is update your stuff. I know that it's annoying. I know you feel like you never do anything but update. The problem is many of those updates either deploy new tools, technologies, functions to those pieces of software, or they fix vulnerabilities. They fix things that I can use to gain unauthorized access to your systems. So very, very important to keep your stuff up to date. I've seen people, they've got this old Windows XP machine sitting in the corner. They only ever turn it on when the kids need to do a school project or something. It always complains about it needs to update, it's end of life, you need to do something, and they just ignore it because they only ever turn it on when they have something to do with it. Eventually, that machine's going to get hacked, ransomed, whatever. And it's not because those guys are actively trying to attack you or targeting you. It's just because you're making yourself the low-hanging fruit. It's very, very important that you update your stuff. And then the last one here, keep calm and love your IT department. It's an interesting, I think, dichotomy. You guys, the staff in general, there are lots of you, right? There are lots of eyes. There are lots of people who can see when something looks wrong or is wrong, or whether it's a phishing attack or me plugging something in or whatever it is. There's lots of eyes. But most staff members don't know what these attacks look like. They don't know what they're looking for. And on the other side, you have the IT guys. They know what they're looking for. They know what these attacks look like, but there are only a few of them. And it's only when you have the many eyes combined with the knowledge of the IT department that you become effective at keeping people like me out of the organization. So it's really, really important that that relationship is strong and encouraging. So those are the things I think you can do at a high level to make yourself and your business safer. That brings me to the end of my slides. Again, I hope you found this interesting. And then I'm going to hand back to Shannon. We'll do a couple of questions.
Yes, thank you, Rudy. Very interesting. So we have a few questions here in the chat. The first one from Rosemary. I think you've actually possibly answered to a certain extent on some of these. The first question from Rosemary is saying, what is the best way to keep passwords safe, especially when we have so many sites that we need to access and remembering all the passwords are quite difficult?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a big problem. I mean, again, we were pressed for time a little bit, but one of the most common things that happen is a bad guy breaks into a website and steals your username and that hash we talked about. And then they go crack it the same way I talked about. Now they've got your username and your password. And because most of you use the same username and password or the same 2 or 3 passwords on all of the hundreds of different websites that you make use of, they now can log into all of these other websites, even though you did nothing wrong, right? They actually, they stole it from the site. You didn't do, but this is pretty common and it's a big problem. So the way we combat that, what I personally do, is make use of a password manager. So you get, there's lots of them. A password manager will let you pick a random password for every website you get to as you sign up. And then the next time you get back to that website, it'll type in the username and the password for you and wait for you to type login or click the login button. All of my passwords, I couldn't tell you what they are. They're all randomly generated 25-character passwords. That's by far the safest way to do it, but it's impossible to remember for a human, and we don't want to write it down. So we make use of these password managers where you only type in your one master password and it unlocks your vault, and that will access that. Yeah, again, if you use an Apple device or a Google Chrome as your browser, you'll be familiar with these keychain processes already. I think that's the best way, but it only works if you're generating random passwords. If you just go and save that same 2 or 3 passwords into your keychain, it's pointless.
I think just as a follow-up to that one, before the other one, from, I think this is Myla. You know, when some websites will ask you if you want to save your password when you create an account for the first time. Is it safe to save your password?
Yeah, it's a very debatable, very interesting question. Let me. One of the big banks, I won't name names, got to a place where they restricted, they stopped people from saving that password. Right? They use their own technology, so you can't save it. And then everybody like me, who's trying to tell you to use a password manager, got super upset because now we can't use password managers to type those passwords in anymore. And eventually, the bank went back on that decision. Now, it doesn't mean that they were wrong or that the security community is right. It's a pro and con problem. I will tell you that if it is used correctly, the only time that password being saved is of value to me is if I already have full access to your entire machine. And at that point, you probably have bigger problems, right? And even if I couldn't pull your password from there, I'd probably be able to install something like a keylogger that just records all of the keystrokes as you type it in next time and then get it like that. So my view is it's fine. I'm sure you'll get other answers from other people, but I think by the time we get to manipulate that as a vulnerability, I've already got full access to your machine. You probably have bigger problems.
Yeah, definitely. From Matthew, from a compliance perspective, how accepted are word string passwords considering the absence of special number characters?
So I think as was clear from my presentation, I'm a big fan of strings for passwords. I think that is generally considered to be the best, short of randomly generated passwords like we were talking about. I think it's the best way to do things. There will definitely be many sites that are restrictive. They'll say you have to use uppercase or special characters. Or the thing is, those guys are trying to help. They're coming from, they assume you're going to pick the least number of characters you can possibly pick. And they're trying to make it stronger by forcing you to do all of these things. But if it's an either-or situation, I'm saying a longer password is more important for me than a complex password using the different ones. Again, I've had very interesting conversations with. There was one guy who's a math major. He was doing his master's thesis on math, and he was trying to determine how difficult it is to combine password sentences, right? We know sentence structures. We know that the is very likely and that one word is very likely to be followed by only a small combination of the next word. It gets very convoluted, but the point is when there's only 26 characters in the lowercase and 26 characters in the uppercase, it's much easier to guess those combinations than it is in the millions of different words that you get in combination. So personally, I'm a fan. But it's an opinion. It's not fact.
Yeah. And I think just from a compliance perspective, I think also what we find is people are still stuck in sort of, you know, the old methodologies of how to set up passwords in terms of how they've set up their password policies, and sometimes don't keep up to date with certain frameworks, for instance, NIST, where they've got all these different new recommendations for how to manage passwords. Okay, then just a final question, Rudy, just from myself. What, in your experience, have you found to be easy points of entry, you know, when you're doing your penetration testing, and just like maybe 1, 2 or 3, and how should these organizations protect themselves from these common sort of points of entry that you normally find?
So it's pretty interesting. I think obviously the answer for me, I made clear in the talk, is social engineering. That's my fallback. That's my fail safe. That's the number one. But moving past that, very often it's outdated software. People are not, they don't understand what they're exposing to the internet. So when you're not doing an assessment of your firewall, you're not getting somebody to do a pen test and tell you why are all of these things internet facing. Developers especially, right? The people who are doing dev work, they love opening up things. They're trying to test a piece of software. They don't want security controls to stop that thing from working. So they'll open up everything to actually test the software, and then often they'll forget to close it again. So doing continual assessments of what you are putting out on the internet, making sure it's very clear to you what ports are open and what's exploitable. That's a common one. And then I think the last one is web, not doing thorough web application testing. You have a website, you've got especially in today's world where they're more mature. It's not just here's my contact info, here's about us. There's login pages and there's back-end systems that our clients use or our partners use. If those things are not thoroughly tested, often they will lead to a vulnerability that gives us access to the database. The database is sitting inside the server environment of the organization, and through that usually SQL database we'll get access to the rest of the business. So I think those are some of the greatest hits. If you're specifically talking about websites, OWASP publishes a top 10 most commonly used vulnerabilities, and I'm saying we will on a continual basis see all 10 of those. So that's a nice place to start as well if you're not sure.
Okay, thank you, Rudy. We are just over 3 o'clock, so 1 minute past 3. We meant to end at 3. I hope this was very insightful and valuable to all of the attendees in the call, and thank you very much for joining. I think what you can take away from this is, as we said in my intro, is October is Cyber Awareness Month, and as Rudy has pointed out, social engineering is typically, one of the easiest points of entry for him, which means that awareness is very important. You and your staff, you really need to ensure that there's awareness across your organization. You'll never be able to know all types of attacks that are coming at you, but the awareness is very important. Thank you very much, Rudy, and thank you to everyone for attending this webinar. Please feel free to reach out to us. I think our contact details have been made available if you have any questions or you'd like any further engagements with us. You're more than welcome to. We have time for such engagements and for answering any other further questions you may have. Thank you very much, all.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.